He gave up his seat to a pregnant woman, but what happened next left everyone speechless. Have you ever done something kind, only to have it completely backfire? In today's story, we meet Marcus, a hard-working man who gives up his seat to a pregnant woman on a crowded subway. But what happens next is nothing short of shocking. An act of kindness spirals into a nightmare of accusations that leaves everyone stunned. Imagine this. You're exhausted after a long day, just trying to get home. You see someone struggling and your instinct is to help. But suddenly, you find yourself at the center of a scene you never could have anticipated. That's exactly what happened to Marcus, and his story will leave you questioning how quickly we jump to conclusions. In this video, we'll walk through the series of events that unfolded that day. From Marcus's simple gesture, to the jaw-dropping accusations, and finally, to the surprising twist that brought the truth to light. Along the way, we'll reflect on the power of kindness, the dangers of snap judgments, and what this story can teach us about human nature. Stay tuned until the end because this story doesn't just entertain, it challenges us to see the world differently. If you've ever wondered how small actions can create ripples far beyond what we imagine, you won't want to miss this. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories that inspire and make us think. Let's dive into this incredible tale of courage, kindness, and resilience. Marcus was a young man in his late 20s, known for his quiet determination and kind heart. After a grueling day at his job as a mechanic, he was tired but eager to get home to celebrate his little sister's birthday. The thought of her smile as she blew out her candles kept him going, even as his body ached from hours of hard labor. As Marcus stepped onto the subway platform, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. The screech of trains pulling into stations, the chatter of passengers, and the hurried shuffle of feet all blended into a chaotic symphony. The air felt heavy, a mix of hot concrete and the faint scent of fast food from nearby vendors. When the train doors opened, Marcus joined the crowd squeezing into the already packed car. Finding a spot near the door, he gripped the overhead bar for balance, his backpack hanging from one shoulder. It was a typical New York commute. Tight spaces, tired faces, and the occasional jolt as the train started moving. Across from him, a woman caught his eye. She was visibly pregnant, clutching the pole for support with one hand and an oversized bag with the other. Her face glistened with sweat, and her legs trembled slightly as the train swayed. It was clear she was struggling to keep her balance. Without hesitation, Marcus stood and gestured to his seat. "Here, ma'am," he said in a kind but firm tone. "You look like you could use this." The woman hesitated for a moment, her expression a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. Finally, she smiled weakly and sank into the seat with a quiet, "Thank you so much." Ash brightened and motioned the woman forward. Marcus nodded and moved closer to the door, gripping the rail to steady himself as the train continued its journey. Despite his exhaustion, he felt a small sense of pride in his gesture. It wasn't much, but it was the right thing to do. For a brief moment, the world seemed a little lighter, a little kinder. Marcus glanced at his watch. There was still time to make it to his sister's dinner if the train stayed on schedule. Little did he know, that simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events he could never have anticipated. The train jolted forward, and Marcus steadied himself against the door, glad the pregnant woman could rest for a bit. The ride continued uneventfully, passengers engrossed in their phones, books, or simply zoning out after a long day. Marcus glanced at his watch again, calculating if he'd have enough time to grab a birthday card for his sister. But just as the train pulled into the next station, a sudden gasp cut through the hum of quiet chatter. Marcus turned in time to see the woman, now slumped forward in her seat, her oversized bag slipping from her hands to the floor. Her head dipped, and before anyone could react, she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The entire subway car froze, as if the air had been sucked out of it. A man nearby yelled, "Someone help her!" Another passenger scrambled to pull the emergency brake, causing the train to lurch and screech to a halt. The overhead lights flickered momentarily, adding to the growing tension. Marcus, acting on instinct, moved toward the woman, crouching down beside her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. Around him the chaos grew. Passengers fumbled with their phones, calling for 911, while others shouted directions or simply stood frozen in confusion. The panic in the air was palpable, a cacophony of voices overlapping. Then, as another passenger helped the woman into a sitting position, her shaky hand rose to point directly at Marcus. Her voice, though weak, cut through the noise like a blade. "It was him," she gasped. He did something to me." For a moment, Marcus thought he misheard her. He blinked, frozen in disbelief. "What?" he stammered. I just gave you my seat." The murmurs started almost immediately, low but insidious, like a ripple through the car. People exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions a mix of confusion and suspicion. A man in a gray suit near the woman spoke up, his brow furrowed. "I saw him standing close to her." "What were you doing near her bag?" Marcus turned toward him, incredulous. "I wasn't near her bag. I've been standing by the door this whole time." But it didn't matter. The suspicion had already taken root. A woman with a stroller muttered something under her breath, her wary gaze flickering toward Marcus. Another passenger, an older man, stepped forward slightly, as if to shield the woman from him. Someone shouted from the back of the car, "Call the police!" Marcus felt his stomach drop. His hands instinctively rose in a defensive gesture, his voice cracking slightly as he said, "Why would you call the cops? I didn't do anything." The tension in the car became suffocating. The murmurs grew louder, speculation spreading like wildfire. "He probably slipped something into her drink," one man muttered. "Or tried to take her bag," another suggested. Marcus's pulse raced as he looked around, his heart sinking at the judgment in their eyes. No one was interested in the truth. They were filling in their own gaps with assumptions. By the time the train screeched to a stop at the next station, transit officers were already on board. Their uniforms and stern expressions only heightened the unease in the air. "What's going on here?" one officer demanded, surveying the tense scene. Passengers immediately began talking over one another, pointing toward Marcus and giving fragmented accounts of what they thought had happened. Miller gave up his seat, but then one woman trailed off, her suspicion clear. "I don't know, something feels off," added another passenger hesitantly. The officer's gaze landed on Marcus, who stood frozen, his hands still slightly raised. "You," the officer said, gesturing toward him, "step off the train so we can sort this out." Marcus's voice was firmer now, though edged with frustration. "I didn't do anything. I just gave her my seat." "Ask anyone." The officers exchanged a glance before one replied. "We'll figure that out. Let's go." As Marcus stepped off the train, escorted by the officers, the whispers behind him stung more than he cared to admit. The eyes of the passengers burned into his back, their judgment weighing heavily on him. In that moment, Marcus realized just how quickly an act of kindness could be twisted into something sinister. The crowd parted, and Marcus stepped into the center of the floor, thrust aside, as he cleared the way for his loaded cart. The platform buzzed with tension as Marcus stepped off the train, his backpack slung over one shoulder and his hand still slightly raised in a gesture of innocence. Behind him, the passengers continued to whisper, their voices rising like a tide of judgment. "I saw him standing close to her bag," someone murmured. "Maybe he slipped something into her drink," another suggested. "Look at how defensive he's being. That's a red flag," a woman added, her voice dripping with suspicion. The transit officers led Marcus a few feet away from the train, their stern faces adding to the weight of the moment. One officer, tall and broad-shouldered, opened a small notepad and asked, "Let me get this straight. You're saying you gave her your seat, and that's it?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "That's all I did. I don't even know her." The shorter officer, standing to the side, crossed his arms and chimed in. Then why would she accuse you? People don't just make these things up. Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, forcing himself to remain calm. He could hear his father's voice in his head, reminding him, "Stay calm, no matter what. Don't give them a reason to see you as a threat." "I don't know why she's saying this," Marcus replied, his tone firmer now. "Maybe she's confused, or maybe something else is going on, but I didn't do anything wrong." Behind the officers, the crowd from the train began to spill onto the platform. Passengers exchanged glances, their stories growing more dramatic with each retelling. "I saw him acting weird," a middle-aged woman in a red coat said hesitantly. "He was standing really close to her, you know." Marcus shook his head, exasperated. "I wasn't anywhere near her except to offer her my seat." The taller officer nodded toward the woman. "Ma'am, did you see anything else suspicious?" She shook her head slowly. "No. But you can't be too careful these days." When the service was over, the words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He took a deep breath, his frustration boiling over. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "You're taking her word and a bunch of guesses over the facts. Check the security cameras if you don't believe me." The officers exchanged a glance, and one of them sighed. "We're working on it. Just cooperate, okay?" The whispers grew louder now, each one a jab at Marcus's character. "He must have done something," someone muttered. "Why else would she accuse him?" But just as Marcus began to feel the weight of the assumptions pressing down on him, a voice cut through the noise. "Wait." A teenage girl with long braids stepped forward, holding her phone. She'd been sitting quietly near the back of the train, unnoticed until now. "I saw the whole thing," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He didn't do anything to her or her stuff. He literally just gave her his seat." Her words hung in the air, a glimmer of hope cutting through the cloud of suspicion. She held up her phone. "I was recording a TikTok when this all happened. I have a video." The shorter officer stepped forward, taking the phone from her. He watched the footage carefully, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as he saw the truth. The video showed Marcus standing near the door, minding his own business. The moment he offered his seat was clear, and there was no indication of him touching the woman or her belongings. The officer handed the phone to his partner, who watched the video and nodded. "This doesn't show any contact between him and the woman," he admitted. For a moment, the whispers died down, replaced by a heavy silence. Marcus looked at the teenage girl, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. She shrugged, her tone casual but firm. "It's just messed up how everyone jumped on you like that. People need to stop assuming the worst." Her words lingered, a crack in the wall of doubt surrounding Marcus. But as much as her actions brought a glimmer of relief, he knew the damage wasn't undone yet. The crowd, the officers, and even the woman who had accused him still needed to face the truth. The tension on the platform was palpable as the officers reviewed the video footage provided by the teenage girl. Marcus stood silently, his jaw clenched, while passengers lingered nearby, straining to catch a glimpse of what was happening. The shorter officer finally spoke, his voice measured. "This footage doesn't show any contact between him and the woman," he said, handing the phone to his partner. The taller officer nodded, his expression softening slightly. "It confirms what you said," he admitted, turning to Marcus. A wave of relief swept over Marcus, but it was short-lived. As much as the video cleared his name, the damage had already been done. Whispers still lingered, eyes still scrutinized him, and the weight of their earlier assumptions hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, a paramedic approached the officers with an update. "The woman's collapse was caused by a severe drop in blood pressure," he explained. "It's unrelated to anything that happened on the train. She could have fainted anywhere." "So," the explanation clarified the situation, but it didn't erase the ordeal Marcus had just endured. "Looks like this was all just a misunderstanding," the taller officer said, his tone almost dismissive. Marcus felt his stomach churn at the word, misunderstanding. It felt far too casual, too dismissive of the judgment he had faced. He stared at the officer, his voice edged with frustration. A misunderstanding? He said bitterly. You think that word erases the fact that I was treated like a criminal for being kind? That everyone here jumped to conclusions without a second thought? The officer scratched the back of his neck, avoiding Marcus's gaze. Look, you're free to go now. We were just being thorough. Marcus let out a sharp exhale, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He wanted to shout, to demand accountability, but he forced himself to remain calm. He could feel the residual stares of the crowd, the unspoken doubts lingering even after the truth had come to light. A moment later, he cleared his throat. His eyes cleared with the clarity of the metal in the back of his head, and he finally knew what to do. As the paramedics helped the woman into an ambulance, her gaze briefly met Marcus's. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she looked away, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and confusion. Marcus watched her leave, the bitterness in his chest only growing. He wasn't angry because of the mistake. He was angry at how easily people had assumed the worst about him. At Jess apparently thinking that he was stupid. At Mike apparently thinking that he was stupid. At Mike apparently thinking that he was stupid. At Mike. The teenage girl approached him again, her phone still in hand. I posted the video, she said softly. People need to see this. Maybe it'll make someone think twice next time. Marcus nodded, grateful but still shaken. Thank you, he said. Not everyone would have done what you did. As the officers walked away and the crowd dispersed, Marcus stood on the platform, the truth finally out but the sting of suspicion still fresh. For him, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reminder of how deeply assumptions and biases could cut, even in moments of kindness. Later that evening, Marcus finally arrived at his sister's birthday dinner. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the room, a stark contrast to the turmoil he'd just experienced. He smiled faintly as his little sister blew out her candles, but the weight of the day still lingered. Stepping out onto the balcony for a moment of quiet, Marcus stared out at the city lights, his mind circling back to the subway incident, the accusations, the whispers, the judgment. All of it had left a mark he couldn't ignore. His sister joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. Rough day? She asked, sensing something was off. Marcus hesitated before nodding. Yeah, something happened on the way here. He recounted every detail, the act of giving up his seat, the accusations, and the teenage girl who had come to his defense. His sister shook her head, her expression a mix of sadness and anger. It's not fair, she said softly. You did the right thing, and somehow you still ended up being the bad guy. Marcus sighed. It's not just me, though. This happens all the time. I was lucky that girl had my back. Not everyone gets that. The teenage girl's decision to post the video weighed on his mind. Her choice wasn't just an act of kindness, it was a call for awareness. She'd seen something unjust and acted, using her voice to highlight the truth in a world too quick to judge. As he stood there, Marcus realized something important. Staying calm had been his greatest strength. In the face of suspicion and bias, his composure had helped reveal the truth. Which shouldn't be this hard to do the right thing, he said quietly. But I'd do it again, every time. As we come to the end of Marcus's story, it's time to pause and reflect. How often do we jump to conclusions? How many times do we see a situation and assume the worst without knowing the full story? This isn't just about what happened to Marcus, it's about the biases and assumptions we carry with us every day. Marcus's act of kindness, a simple gesture of giving up his seat, should have been celebrated. Instead, it became a moment of judgment, fueled by fear and misunderstanding. But what stands out most is the courage of one person to speak up. The teenage girl who recorded and shared the truth reminded us all of the power of standing against injustice, no matter how small the act may seem. This story is a call to action for all of us. The next time you find yourself making assumptions, stop and ask, what's the full story? Am I seeing the truth or just a part of it? Kindness matters, but so does the courage to question our biases and give others the benefit of the doubt. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a situation like this? How did it affect you? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content that challenges perspectives and inspires change. And stay tuned, our next video dives into another powerful real-life story about perseverance and hope that you won't want to miss. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching, and remember, even small acts of kindness can create ripples far beyond what we can imagine. Let's make the world a little more understanding, one story at a time. Personal debt.